Hello, hello, hello. It's your man again, Diego Efe, and I'm back with yet another one. I hope everyone's doing fantastic. Now, the title for this upload is Football, a proxy tool of emasculation. Football has been a big part of my life since the age of 3 or 4 years old. Now, I can make out a few recollections of the 1990 World Cup, in particular, England versus Germany, and Paul Gascoigne being carded such that he was not going to play in the final if England did prevail, which they didn't. My dad was also involved in football back home, and he certainly passed on his love of the game to me. The influence took a while to really take root, but the first real chapter in my young life of getting involved with a professional football club was when Queen's Park Rangers and my local primary school developed a scheme which they wanted to use to identify the footballers that had the best prospects of making it pro. Now, I liked football a lot at that time. I also liked other sports like athletics. I used to really love Michael Johnson. I liked tennis, Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras, Tim Henman to a lesser extent, so on and so forth. But there was something about football which just made it so accessible and so intriguing. And I remember, and this probably helped build out my knowledge of the game. The Premier League used to sell these, and I think they might still sell some form of it, but they used to sell these soccer albums which you had to buy stickers, and you'd get a prize, I believe, based on if you were able to populate the whole book with stickers of the players who were featured in this album. This was like a marketing tool. It was a very genius one in hindsight, but these things all contributed to me developing a peerless love of the game. When I say peerless, I'm talking about peerless with respect to any of the other sports I was interested in. For me, it was just about fun. It hadn't got to a point where people started to be a bit catty about, oh, I'm better than you, you're better than me. It hadn't quite got to that point. I just used to enjoy it. I used to enjoy it, and I used to enjoy watching games with my dad and his occasional outbursts when someone did not play the ball in a timely fashion. I would say it was only when I got to secondary school, or probably what Americans would call junior high. I was 11, 12, and I had gone from playing sort of 7-a-side, 9-a-side football to playing 11-a-side for the first time. Naturally, that would come with some adjustment in your understanding of the game and some form of adaptation process. So what happened was I moved home. It was still within West London, but I moved from one part of my borough to another. And so whereas Queen's Park Rangers was literally right opposite my apartment, or my family apartment, as in literally if I looked out my bedroom window, I could see the stadium. Every time the home team scored, you'd hear deafening sounds. The sounds of chanting and celebration from fans. And I moved from there to closer to Fulham Football Club. And so naturally, it was easier to have an association with Fulham Football Club. And so I used to partake every Saturday from about 10 a.m. to 12. I used to partake in some scheme, which was a pathway into playing for the academy. And I used to really enjoy it. And things were going pretty well. Innocently, I went into school one day and I said I'm really enjoying this training scheme and it might be a pathway onto better things. And my coach said that they wanted to organize a youth football tournament in Barcelona. And I mean, I'd left the country before to go to Nigeria for Christmas holiday. I guess you could call it the analog version of Dirty December. But I hadn't left, lest I forget, day trip to France. Outside of that, I hadn't left the country. And so to be able to not just leave the country beyond the school trip and the family trip, but also to play, that was like, wow. So like I said, I went into school and I told some friends it was just by chance. You know, it wasn't me like looking to get a pat on the back, just by chance, just chitter chatter. And from that point onward, I started being ridiculed. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was jealousy. You know, I just thought that I must have done something wrong or said something outlandish. And I'm like, no, I'm being serious. Like, I can provide proof. I can actually have someone vouch for me that I'm not speaking nonsense. But what I realized, I should say, was that my peers did not really care about the truth. It was just that it was something so outlandish, at least in their young minds, that they couldn't help but by instinct ridicule me. So I just said, you know what, I don't really care, thick skin, all that lovely stuff. And then what happened following that was I started getting better and better. And the thing was, I mean, I harbored some desire to play football, but it just seemed so distant. I thought, is it really going to happen? You know, we'll see how it goes. And so gradually I started to play for amateur football teams, and then I started to get identified and attract attention from professional clubs. As this was happening, I'm not the kind of person that ever told someone, oh, you're useless at the game, you're rubbish at the game, blah, blah, blah. I was never that. In fact, if anything, I was more of the encouraging type. If I ever captained a game, for instance, I wouldn't really lambast. The most I would say is, come on! That's the most I would do, you understand? But I wouldn't say, I wouldn't berate people, let me just say that much. But what I observed was, again, the people who used to rib me and try to get in my head, they weren't very good at the game themselves, if I'm being honest. It wasn't my place to tell them, don't really care to tell them. But they weren't particularly good. And so what I came to realize, and what informs the tribal component of football, is that most people who play the game are obviously not going to be good enough to play at a high level under those intense conditions, right, with the standard of expectation that it rests on your shoulders. So the next best thing is to live vicariously through those footballers that are playing on that big stage. And of course, the people that are closest to you, relatively speaking, are the ones that might feed away at one person being able to make it out of the group. And so of course it attracted a lot of attention and jealousy. And it went from me playing for a cluster of like amateur teams in West London and South London and North London. The only part of London I didn't play for any amateur teams was East London, but everywhere else in London I did. But when I now started going to professional clubs, I spent, especially in year 10, so that's between the ages of 14 and 15, I went from playing for a amateur team called Roehampton Football Club to playing at Chelsea's academy. And I'm going to provide more anecdotes in future uploads because I could probably speak about this at length. But I remember the year before I went to Chelsea, my secondary school used to show the World Cup matches from, the Japan/South Korea hosted World Cup in 2002. And it was interesting because I remember, my school had a very large Anglo-Irish contingent. So of course, people that were born and or raised in the UK, in some cases it's their grandparents that came over, but they had this very strong sense of Irish consciousness, such that when England lost to Brazil, they were cheering on Brazil. But I digress. My friend, probably my closest friend, he was ranting and raving about a guy called Damien Duff that played for Blackburn Rovers and the Republic of Ireland. And I looked at him, and the funny thing was, I actually had watched him playing like probably the season before. I think it was because Arsenal lost to Blackburn Rovers and he scored. And how could I possibly forget? I'm an Arsenal fan. So anyway, Damien Duff, I started paying attention to him the same season that I made the transition from amateur to professional. And the real interesting thing was that when I went to Chelsea, around the same time I went, he had joined himself. Now, the significance of it is he's left-footed attacking midfielder, or was anyway. I'm left-footed. And so I went from watching this guy on TV and just being content with playing amateur football, just wanted to get regularity with it, to being literally one position behind him. And so all I had to pretty much do was surmount the final hurdles secure my full-time contract, which I got very close to doing. Near enough I'd secured it before I lost it. Another story for another time. And it just was remarkable. And the funny thing was, again, I'm going to speak about some of these stories at greater length in some other uploads, but it was surreal. It was like a permanent out-of-body experience. And part of me, I'd done well on the trial. Like, I really held my own. I was playing with the best players in the country, and I was the last man standing after all the other players had like dropped out or had gone to smaller football clubs. I was the one last man standing. Yeah, very proud of that, mind you. And I'd never even worked as hard as I had in terms of all the different challenges and obstacles. But they done it obviously to raise your level. It's not to it's not personal. They want you to do well. And what I was going to say was, although I did well, I asked myself, can I see myself replacing Damien Duff in Chelsea's first team? I was 15, obviously making the transition into full-time football. And I had told myself, maybe I can, but it just seems more improbable than anything else. Possible, but improbable. Lo and behold, they sold him when I was 18. 17, 18, it was that period. And I was irritated because I was expecting to be fit enough and ready enough and competent enough by the age of 17 to 18, certainly 18. There was no other player of my style or my positional style, and I was a rare type of player, so it just seemed like it was set up, but life happens like that. Anyway, the long story shortened of what I'm saying is, along the way, there's a lot of young men who, because they didn't necessarily feel a sense of adequacy, a sense of masculinity, the next best thing is to try to skive down those who were on their path, living out their own masculine journey. Now, for me, one of the things that really appealed when it came to playing football was the discipline aspect. I had to build muscle, I had to be consistent with my training, I had to be really scientific in my approach. Whether that was, for example, knocking the ball against the wall, like Dennis Bergkamp would say, studying the movement of the ball and knowing how to replicate that. This helps you one touch, two touch. You do that, it's a marked stride towards becoming professional. Whether it was your types of sprinting, whether it was like rehearsing certain scenarios playing out and what I would do, you name it. Psychologists, and I recognized that a lot of my peers, even the ones I played with professionally, this is the other thing I find interesting, right? I was going to say that the rite of passage is important because these men, or young boys, adolescents, were struggling with that transition. And so someone else who seemed like they were on their path was arguably, made an enemy, or at least cast in the light of an enemy. But even at professional clubs, there are people that played in the Premier League who were hating on me. People that played at a good level that were, when I say hating, not like, I hate you, but more like, intimidated, shall I say. And the thing was, I rated them. And I guess they rated me too, but obviously I was more friendly about it. They were probably a bit more hostile. And it's cool, I'm not upset by it. It is literally reflective of one trying to navigate masculinity, the path towards it. And football in that context was used time and again as a way to emasculate men, to emasculate me. If I would have a bad game and, for instance, you'd have people on the sidelines, like, would I say shouting abuse? Kind of, sort of. And just from their body language and their energy and what have you, it weren't like, sometimes young boys can rib each other. They can maybe make certain jokes and insult each other. Some people call it roasting each other, and it weren't that. They wanted me to fail. So if I had a bad touch, made a bad decision, of course that does not represent the totality of your ability, but it would become a talking point. And before you know it, you have all these people coming up to you and telling you this, that, and the other. The whole point of it was, if I looked like I was struggling, it made said people feel better about themselves. It was some form of departure or digression from their own issues. And so, ironically, me playing football and excelling at it made many feel emasculated. And so what was the next best thing to do? Collectively try to get into my head using that everyday casual witchcraft. Of course, there are kids that I don't hold it against them in hindsight, but it's just to make a point. Use that everyday witchcraft and really just try to diffuse that negativity in your mind. And the sense of pride that you could see, if I, like I said, I made a mistake here and there, I kind of felt sorry for them. They felt emasculated by me and wanted to emasculate me in order to feel better about themselves. And like I said, at the time, I could not clearly see it for what it was because there was numbers of them and it's me. And it was only myself and another friend that was at professional clubs from our entire school, actually. Yeah, it was just I and another friend who were at professional clubs. And I'm not sure why, but they seemed to be okay with him. They didn't give him the kind of energy they gave me. But in hindsight, I can possibly see why. As good a footballer as he was, in the end, it turned out that I was better than him. And this is really not me saying this in terms of boasting. It's just matter of fact, I was a better footballer. And I got close to youth national honours. He didn't get anywhere near. And so I see in a sense that there was this real jealousy because I was taking leaps and bounds. I was making quantum leaps in my development. And so I ended up actually playing professionally, albeit I was 23 when I played my first and only professional match, which the rest of that would have been youth and sort of second string or second tier football. Good experience, and it set me up for the franchise that I'm launching, the African Platinum League. So there's nothing that's wasted. But what I will say is tribalism in football, aka fans getting at each other, players abusing, or rather I should say fans abusing the fans of rival teams, abusing players if they're attending games and so on and so forth. All of that is using football as a proxy tool of emasculation, because the people who weaponize football as a tool of proxy emasculation have real deep-seated issues themselves when it comes to masculinity. They fail to realize that masculinity in itself is a continuum. You don't graduate from masculinity until you're 6 feet under, until it's time to tap out. But until then, the journey of masculinity continues, and it does one a disservice to look for ways to try to chip at another man's sense of self as a man. It's actually kind of criminal in my opinion. It's a cardinal sin, but I guess it is what it is. So it's far better to self-identify one's shortcomings or areas that they would like to be better in, whether that's to do with martial arts or whether it's to do with one's physique or you name it, whatever it is, right? If you didn't necessarily get those foundations in your adolescence / young adult years, it's not too late. It's about identifying those things and looking to make up the gap, and in doing so, many more of us will feel a sense of contentment, which is very important, especially in the times we're moving into. Peace of mind is paramount. It's priceless. And so on that note, I'm going to conclude. To anyone who has ears, please do not use football as an emasculation proxy tool. It's a shame, and it doesn't set a good precedent. It's certainly not a good influence to other people that are more impressionable and having their own challenges with masculinity. But have a fantastic weekend. Thank you for listening to this particular upload, and until next time, peace. It's been real.